You spend carefully, you skip the expensive coffee, you buy the store brand, you wait for the sale. You've been doing all of this for years, quietly proud of it, actually. And yet, when you look at your bank account at the end of the month, it still doesn't feel like enough. It still feels like you're running in place. And there's this specific kind of frustration that comes with that because you're not being reckless, you're not splurging, you're doing the things you were told to do, and somehow it's still not working the way it was supposed to. What if I told you that some of the habits you've built specifically to save money are actually costing you more than they save? Not because you're doing them wrong, but because there's a version of being careful with money that quietly works against you. And most financial content never talks about it because it's more comfortable to celebrate frugality than to question it. That's what this video is about. Not to tell you that saving is bad or that you should spend more freely, but to look honestly at the specific ways that cost-cutting thinking can backfire and why understanding that might actually be the most useful financial thing you do this year. There's a story most of us grew up with about what a responsible person looks like with money. They don't waste, they're careful, they look for deals, they delay gratification, they pinch pennies. And that story isn't wrong, exactly. Those instincts come from a real place, often from watching people struggle, from absorbing the anxiety of households where money was tight, and every dollar genuinely mattered. But here's where it gets complicated. The habits that protect you when money is genuinely scarce don't automatically become the right habits when your situation changes. And even when money is scarce, some cost-cutting behaviors create hidden costs that offset or outweigh what you're saving. Most financial advice treats frugality as a direction, like the more of it you apply, the better off you'll be. But frugality is actually a tool. And like any tool, it works brilliantly in the right context and causes damage in the wrong one. The reason this is hard to see is that the costs of cheap habits are usually invisible, delayed, or indirect. The money you save by buying the cheapest version of something shows up immediately on your receipt. The cost of that choice, in replacement time, in opportunity cost, in the way it shapes your relationship with money long term, shows up slowly, quietly, in ways that don't announce themselves. Behavioral economists have a name for this kind of thinking. They call it narrow framing, when we evaluate a financial decision in isolation, rather than in the context of its full downstream effects. We see the price tag, we don't see the full picture. And when that happens consistently, a pattern of decisions that each individually look responsible can add up to something that works against you. Let me walk you through what this actually looks like, because I think the real-world examples are where this starts to land. The first pattern is what you might call false economy, buying cheap things repeatedly instead of buying one good thing once. Imagine you need a pair of work shoes. You find a pair for $20 that looks fine, and you buy them. 4 months later, they're worn through, and you buy another pair for $20. Then another. Over 2 years, you've spent $120 on shoes and spent time buying them 3 times. The $40 pair that would have lasted 2 years and felt better the whole time would have been the cheaper choice. But it didn't feel like the cheaper choice at the point of purchase, because the $40 number was bigger than the $20 number. And our brains are much better at comparing present costs than at calculating future ones. This pattern shows up everywhere. Cheap tools that break, cheap appliances that fail after a year, cheap materials for projects that need to be redone. The sticker price is lower, the total cost isn't, and each individual purchase felt frugal, so the cumulative overspending never really registers. Then there's the time trap. This one is subtler and I think more important. There's a version of being careful with money that quietly consumes enormous amounts of time. Driving across town to save $4 on groceries. Spending an hour comparing options to save $8. Doing things yourself instead of paying someone because the labor cost feels like a waste. And none of these decisions are wrong in isolation. Sometimes the time is worth it. Sometimes DIY is genuinely the best choice. But there are moments, and most of us have been in them, when we spend 2 hours solving a problem we could have paid someone $40 to fix in 20 minutes. In that moment, we saved $40 and spent 2 hours. Whether that trade-off makes sense depends entirely on what else those 2 hours could have been. If you have a skill, a side project, a job that could use those hours, or simply rest you genuinely need, the $40 might have been the more valuable choice. But because we can see the $40 and can't easily quantify the 2 hours, the math looks obvious when it isn't. The deeper issue here is that time and money aren't actually separate resources. They trade against each other constantly, and an approach to money that treats every dollar as precious while treating hours as infinite will consistently make trades that don't work in your favor. There's another habit that's less about spending and more about not investing in yourself, in your tools, in things that generate more than they cost. This is where cheap thinking gets genuinely expensive over the long run. Skipping a course that would have made you better at your job. Not upgrading the software that wastes 45 minutes of your day. Staying in a role that underpays you because looking for a new one feels risky and costs energy. Avoiding the medical appointment because the copay feels like a lot right now. Each of these has a visible short-term cost, and each of them has an invisible long-term cost that is almost always larger. The instinct to avoid spending is not wrong, but when it gets applied to things that would generate return, rather than things that just feel good, it stops being frugality and starts being self-limiting. The mindset that protects you from wasteful spending starts quietly blocking the investments that would actually move your life forward. I want to name something here because I think it's important. A lot of this comes from a scarcity mindset, a deep, often subconscious belief that there isn't enough, that spending anything beyond the minimum is dangerous, that financial safety means holding on to what you have as tightly as possible. And for a lot of people, that belief was formed in real circumstances. It wasn't made up. It was a reasonable adaptation to a difficult environment, but a scarcity mindset applied to a different environment, one where strategic spending could actually generate more, keeps you in survival mode when you're no longer just surviving. It treats every financial decision as a potential threat rather than a potential lever. And that shift in framing from how do I protect what I have to how do I make what I have work harder is one of the most significant mental transitions in building actual financial momentum. There's also the discount trap, buying things you didn't need because they were on sale. This one is almost too familiar. The item is 50% off. The deal is right in front of you. And the brain, which is wired to respond to perceived gains and losses, registers this as a win. You saved money, except you didn't because you weren't going to buy the thing at full price either. You spent money to capture a deal. The sale didn't save you anything. It just made the spending feel virtuous. This is one of the most well-documented patterns in behavioral economics. Retailers understand it deeply. The discount framing doesn't just make a purchase more attractive. It makes it feel financially responsible, which is a much more powerful psychological lever. And the result is that people with genuine frugal intentions consistently end up spending more because of sales, not less. Here's the reframe I want to offer, because I think it changes how all of this looks. Being good with money isn't about minimizing spending. It's about making spending intentional. Those are not the same thing, and conflating them is where a lot of the confusion comes from. Minimizing spending as a goal will always create these distortions, the false economies, the time traps, the avoided investments, the discount purchases, because the metric is wrong. When the goal is spend as little as possible, every decision gets evaluated against that standard, regardless of whether it's the right standard for that decision. When the goal shifts to make sure every dollar I spend is doing something useful, then cheap when cheap is smart, and spend when spending is smart. The tool serves the situation instead of the tool running on autopilot. And I think there's something even deeper here. A lot of hyper-frugal behavior isn't really about the money at all. It's about anxiety, about control, about a relationship with scarcity that formed a long time ago and hasn't been updated since. When that's what's driving the decisions, no amount of savings ever feels like enough because the behavior isn't actually about reaching a number. It's about managing a feeling. Recognizing that doesn't fix it overnight. But it does mean the work isn't just financial. It's about examining what you actually believe about money and whether those beliefs are serving the life you're trying to build. That's slower, quieter work, but it's where the real shift happens. So what does this look like in practice? Because I don't want to leave you with a mindset shift and no idea what to do with it. The first thing worth trying is what I'd call a cost per use calculation, at least for bigger purchases. Before defaulting to the cheapest option, ask, how long will this last and how often will I use it? A $30 item you use daily for 2 years costs less per day than a $15 item that lasts 3 months. That math doesn't always favor the expensive option, but it sometimes does, and doing it consciously means you're choosing rather than defaulting. The second thing is a time audit, just a loose one. For the next couple of weeks, notice when you're spending significant time to save a relatively small amount of money. Not to judge it, just to see it clearly. Sometimes you'll decide the trade off was worth it. Sometimes you'll realize you spent an hour to save $6, and that $6 wasn't actually what the hour was worth to you. Third, try to identify one area where you've been applying frugality to something that might actually be an investment. A tool for your work, a skill you've wanted to develop, a health thing you've been deferring. Just one, and ask honestly whether the cost of doing it might be smaller than the cost of not doing it. And finally, notice your relationship with sales and discounts. Not to swear them off, but just to ask. Before you buy, was I going to buy this anyway? If yes, a discount didn't save you money. It created a purchase. Those are different situations, and they're worth keeping separate. Starting with one of these is enough. Shifting how you see one decision changes the pattern more than overhauling everything at once. Financial clarity isn't a switch you flip. It's more like a gradual tuning. The more honestly you look at your habits, the more you start to see which ones are actually serving you and which ones are just familiar. The habits we've talked about today aren't signs that something is wrong with you. They're signs that you've been trying, carefully, sometimes too carefully in the wrong directions. And that trying, that care about your financial life is actually the thing that makes the shift possible. You just need somewhere better to aim it. You're going to make some of these trades imperfectly. You'll still buy the cheap thing that breaks, still spend the hour to save the $5, still click on the sale you didn't need. That's fine. That's what being human with money looks like. The goal isn't perfect decisions. It's more conscious ones over time, building something that actually feels like forward motion. That's always been enough. If something in this video clicked for you, I'd genuinely love for you to stick around. There's a lot more on this channel about the quiet ways our psychology shapes our money, and I think you'll find it useful. If this one was worth your time, passing it to someone who's been trying hard and wondering why it's not working yet might be the most valuable thing you do with it. And if you want to see more from Clara, the subscribe button's right there, and it costs exactly nothing, which, after everything we just talked about, is the kind of deal that's actually worth taking.